are going to be presenting what are APIs, and we're also going to play a little game at the end of it to sort of put our knowledge about APIs together. So if you don't know anything about APIs or what it stands for, that's totally great. And I know you guys are here for HackDavis and you guys want to use, maybe you've heard the term API floating around and you want to start using them in your projects.
Wait, no, this
is the perfect workshop for you. Before we do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about our organization. So basically, we are a student club on campus. We're relatively new. We just started operations essentially this year. What we basically do is we actually we use technology to rethink the way we teach STEM education. And that's us. So I'm actually the head of a team called Developer Relations, and then I have two of our fellow developers, and we're going to be helping you with the workshop today. So let's talk about APIs. We're going to basically first go into what actually are APIs, and then we're going to actually use this tool called Postman. If you guys couldn't tell, we're all wearing Postman shirts here, Postman. So basically, we're going to go around and basically teach you guys how you can use Postman to actually work with APIs and test with APIs. And then we're going to learn how to create collections. We're also going to play a little game called BitBoxes and learn about automation with Postman. So before we get started, I know the Wi-Fi is a little bit shaky today, but if you guys could connect to either EDU Roam or UCD Guest and start downloading Postman right now, it would help greatly once we get to the interactive part of the workshop where you guys can interact with Postman. But to do that, you'll have to have Postman installed, so please make that happen before we get to that part. And also, yes, create a Postman account as well. So let's talk about what exactly is an API. You may have heard this term floating around in either your programming classes or maybe some of your friends have been talking to APIs. But basically, they just let you interact with actual data. They let programs interact with each other, and they don't have to expose any source code. So for instance, let's just say you're going to your favorite fast food restaurant, and you go close to the drive-thru, and you get an order, right? You make an order, and you say, hey, I want a double-double with fries, right? Then when you pull up to the drive-thru, you actually get your food, you exchange your money. And it doesn't really matter, you don't really care about what happened inside of the restaurant, right? You just care that you got the food. In this analogy, essentially, you could think of the restaurant as the API, and you make a request to the API, which is like a food order. And then what you get back is data, or in some cases status codes, which we'll talk about that later. But basically, you don't worry about how that data was generated, how it was structured, you just want the data itself. So you get it in the form of your burger. So APIs basically let you develop faster. So for instance, let's just say I'm an aspiring mobile developer, and I want to develop push notifications for my app that I'm making. And I don't know anything about push notifications, how the infrastructure is set up, how they actually work inside of code. I have no idea how that works. But I can just use an API and say, hey, I want push notifications triggered at a certain time. I don't have to worry about how does Apple handle push notifications. I don't have to handle that what we call low-level code. I can just say, hey, I want this push notification at this time, and I can use an API to do that. It makes development really easy and really fast. Now, another reason why APIs are useful is very easy data access. We live in the age of data and technology, right? Data is so accessible to us all over the place, and there's so much data that you may not even know where to start. Well, that's where APIs come in really handy, because you can just make requests to an API, and it can do all the heavy work for you. You can say, hey, I want weather data from Sydney today at 2 p.m. I can make those filters for a request for an API, and I can get that specific data back, and I don't have to worry about how it was generated. I can just get that data. I can basically sift through all the mountains of data that are there today and just really focus on the data that matters to me the most. Now let's talk about a bit more technical terms. So what is a RESTful API? If you guys don't know, REST stands for Representational State Transfer. And RESTful APIs basically allow programs to communicate each other using what's called an HTTP request. So let's just say you load a page on your favorite browser. And let's just say you go to google.com. What happens is your actual web page, your browser, makes a request to Google server saying, hey, I want google.com's home page. Could you get that for me? Google says yes. they send back to the home page, and then your page loads in the form of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And your web page actually goes to google.com. So that's basically how RESTful APIs and HTTP requests communicate with each other. I'll talk briefly here about what's called HTTP methods. So there are different types of HTTP requests. These four are the most common. And so basically, you can see, you guys can read the definition up there. It's mostly pretty self-explanatory. It's like get is like you're getting data. Post is like you're posting a new object and things like that, etc. You guys can read all that. You don't have to memorize these right now. We're definitely going to interact with these endpoints, or sorry, these methods in a much more intuitive fashion in our game. So I've used this term endpoints a little bit, and I'll just briefly describe what that actually means. So basically, endpoints are the receiving end of all your API requests. So the endpoints in the API, they take a request, and if you want data, and it returns a response. So let's just say you're pulling up to that drive-thru. Going back to that analogy, you're pulling up to the drive-thru window, you've already paid, and you're coming to the stand. And the server gives you your food and tells you that everything went well, right? So the food, remember, the food in this analogy can be seen as the data, and the worker there will tell you, hey, everything went well. That's like that can be called a status code. It's basically the status of your request, whether it was fulfilled, whether it was rejected, whether the formatting was wrong, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes you may pull up to a fast food restaurant late at night at like 2 or 3 a.m. and then they ran out of fries. Then the worker would tell you, hey, we ran out of fries, would you like something else to replace those fries? That's basically what a status code is. Now obviously a status code isn't like, in the API world, it's not like French fries, right? It's like actual, it's actually just a number. It's mostly a 3-digit number. But you guys can just think of endpoints and status codes with that analogy. Before I keep continuing, are there any questions? Yes? Oh yeah, sure. So maybe I went through this a bit quickly. I can just briefly talk about this. So get is basically you get data. Post is like you're assigning a value to an empty object. That basically means you're making a new object, you're making new data, and you want to post it to the server. And after you post it to the server, let's just say you want to edit that existing data. That's what put is for, and deleting is just deleting the data that's already there. Yes?
Do APIs talk to, what are they interacting with?
APIs? They interact with your apps. So usually what happens is, like whether you make a web app, a mobile app, you can actually like insert some code and say, hey, I want to have this, like I want to make this certain request, right? And basically we're going to go into detail about why Postman makes that easier. If you're familiar more with like web development, like a lot of like web programmers, they use like these technologies like Axios or the Fetch API to actually like execute requests. And so basically, an API is just, you can think of API as literally just an entity that processes like a request and returns data for you, and you can actually use code to make that happen. Any other questions? Cool. So we're going to talk about our game. So we're going to be introducing like how you can use Postman to test your APIs, and this is all going to be in the context of a game that we'll play at the end of the session. Now let's just keep this in mind. Your goal is, there's going to be a 20 by 20 board, and if you visit this website right now, we'll give you a chance to look at this later, but if you look at this website right now, there should be a 20 by 20 board, and your job is to basically fill adjacent squares with your team's color. Yes, you'll be teaming up later. That'll be fun. And then what you're supposed to do is try to get the biggest blob. Basically, like you want to have the most amount of connected squares. And we're going to use API requests to actually like change the color, delete colors, etc., etc. And yeah, I talked about that. Yes?
Can you go back?
This one? Yeah, I'll give you guys a second too. We're not going to interact with this until a little bit later, but if you guys want to check it out right now, you guys can. Okay, I will just move on for now, and the link will be available later. go into Postman and how you use Postman to test your APIs. We're going to talk about this tool called curl. Now, curl is kind of the way that web developers used to connect to APIs. It's basically a command line tool where you can get and send data, and you can do this directly in your terminal or command prompt for Windows. So if everyone right now can take a moment and open your terminal or command prompt. And if you guys don't know what those are, we can have our developers here help you out with that. But if you guys can open that, it's terminal for Mac, command prompt for Windows. And we're going to start talking about our HTTP methods. So the first slide here is going to be on GET requests. So we want to use a GET request whenever we want to get a specific piece of data or a collection of data, right? And what happens is GET requests usually return some sort of data object. If you guys are familiar with JSON, that's usually what it is, and also a 200 status code. So if you guys can do this in your terminal right now, just type in that whole line. And yes, you should type it in because this is part of the process. We want you to see like how web developers used to do it and like how Postman makes this process so much easier. So if everyone can type that in right now and see what happens, that'd be awesome. So if anyone has questions, Michelle and Jeff will be walking around in the Postman shirts.
I find it sexy. It's so spacey, you know, that white and that black text, that's on the way back.
I think the whole thing. You literally just copy. You just like type in the whole thing. And if you don't know what any of these means, what we can do is for now, I'm just going to
Okay.
So, has anyone typed in the whole thing? Okay. Can one of you guys explain what you guys see?
Ugly mess.
Ugly mess. Yes, it's a bunch of garbage, right? And if you're a new programmer, you have no idea what any of that means. Not helpful at all, right? But that's the thing. That's literally the data object that I was talking about. It's in that format. It's in JSON format. But as you can see, that's a pain in the butt to read through. So in a while, we're going to talk about Postman and see how that can help this process. But for now, let's move on. So now we're going to talk about post requests. So remember, post requests lets you send data to the server, like you're actually making a new object, right? Now, post requests generally don't return data because it's not like you're getting data and you want to have a data object that you want to manipulate. So post requests actually don't return data, they just return a status code. And the status code is 200 if you successfully executed the post request. So let's type in that request now. You can use the previous one. Terminal tip, if you guys click up on terminal, then you can get your previous command. So you guys don't have to type that whole thing out again. But basically it's the same prompt, just change get to post. And also notice here, and where the arrows say the box ID and the color. So remember, we're actually posting data to the server. In this case, this post request is actually going to change the color of the box on the server. So if you guys loaded the URL, you guys can see a 20 by 20 grid. And the box IDs, or the number in this case, is just could be a number from 1 to 400. So if you guys make this request right now, you guys can see the color actually changing. And real quick, the possible colors, I don't remember them off the top of my head. So the possible colors are orange, yellow, blue, and green. So if you type in one of those colors, you will see, and you make the post request, you will see the color actually change. Yeah, so. Okay, due to time, I'm just going to move on to put requests. So basically, a put request is used to change existing data. This is different from post, which actually makes new data. And this distinction is actually going to be really important when we start our game later. So please bear that in mind. And if you guys want to test out the put request, you can do that by changing the keyword from post to put. But then you can keep the ID, the box ID, and the color because you're changing the color. So you want the box ID that you want to change and the color that you want to change to. Yes. Yeah. You see white girl. You don't even push that piece right at the top. That's right. It's white. That's good. It's actually good for game all the other teams. Okay, so let's move on to delete requests. Basically, it's pretty much the same for delete requests. It's just that it doesn't really matter the color, so you just put the box ID. That's pretty much it. So now let's move on to Postman, because I'm sure you guys have been dealing with curl for the last few minutes and decided it was a pain in the butt. So now let's talk about Postman and how we can make this API development process much easier. The first feature that Postman utilizes is easy endpoint testing. So Postman allows you to easily test your API with the click of a button. So usually, if you guys are more familiar with like coding and web development, you would actually have to code this request out in a code if you didn't have Postman. Well, in Postman, you can literally just provide the API endpoint, which in most cases is a URL of some sort, and you can just select like your method and then execute it and see the results. You can also organize your requests. So sometimes the requests may get really like garbled and all over the place, especially when you're dealing with a lot of them. And so basically, you can actually organize your API requests and make them into folders, for instance. So how many of you guys have Postman downloaded now? Could I get a show of hands? Okay, awesome. So what you guys should do is configure your Postman account and all that, and go to Postman and actually create a new collection. You can do that by clicking the New button on the top left, as you can see, and you can select Collection and then also like fill out your name and your description for your Postman collection. So real quick, can I get a show of hands again? How many people have made a collection and they finished all of this? Okay, I'll give you guys a couple more minutes. so judging by how quiet the room is, I think that we can move on. The next part, basically, we're going to actually create a request now inside of Postman to get a single box's color. So you guys remember all of that curl that we had to type in initially for the get request, right? We don't have to do that with Postman. Before we go into the request, though, we'll talk a little bit about environments. Basically, environments let you store variables, and these variables allow you to basically customize your request so you don't have to keep typing over the same thing over and over again. So for instance, if you have like a password, you don't have to type it in over and over again, right? So basically, this is what environments let you do. They let you put these really sensitive pieces of information into variables so you can just reference the variable name instead of referencing the full value. Anyways, let's move on to creating an environment. So you guys can see on the top right corner, there's a gear icon, so you guys click on the gear icon and then click add, you guys can set up your first environment. So now let's move on to what you're going to put inside of that environment. You would usually put credentials in there. And basically they let you these credentials allow you to encapsulate sensitive data. So basically, we kept having to type in the bitblock URL in our curl request. We can just make that really, really simple in Postman by making a URL variable. So if you guys remember, here's that URL, and we're going to make that URL into a variable in Postman. Now, you guys may have seen this API key. Basically, an API key, I'll explain it now. An API key is essentially a password for an API. So APIs allow for very authenticated access, and all the APIs you'll be using, whether it's in development today or in the future, is going to have to require an API key. An API key is basically just a password that you need to get into an API. And usually for developer APIs, you'll have to go through a process to generate this key, or keys in some cases. But we're providing the API key for you today, so all of you guys can have access to our API that we're using. So we're going to make this API key also into a variable as well. Oh yeah, so this slide might not be, I realize this slide might not be a little clear, but what you should do is actually make these two variables. You basically should just fill it out just like that. So by the time you finish with your environment, your window should look just like that, essentially. So who's finished this step? Who has this window ready to go? Okay, I'll give you guys like 1 more minute to catch up. Put in the URL that you talked about before that we do. Okay, so we're going to move to the next step here. Essentially, what you guys should do now is open a collection. And the icon's really small on the bottom left. But if you guys can see that really small icon, you can open up the menu where you can actually see your collections. So now, if you guys have your collection all ready to go, you should click on this collection and look for the ellipses icon in your collection, and basically click on that. And what you should do is actually make a GET request. So you guys can follow the arrows, and you guys should see that window on the right side. And you can let us know if you have trouble with that. Okay, so quick show of hands. Who is at this screen or finished this? Okay, I'll give like 20 seconds. I really want to get to our games and stuff. So now we're going to move to user authentication. So I talked about at the beginning of the presentation that APIs let you have easy but also authenticated access to data. And so now we're going to actually set up the authentication. Now usually for authentication can get really messy. If you remember in our curly URLs, you have to type in like a question mark and then type in API key equals this is the API key. And in Postman, you don't have to do any of that. You can just click on API key under the authentication tab. So if you guys can't see the authentication tab, it's just the second tab right under the URL link. I'll just point at it. So it's like right there. You guys can see it. It's pretty small. So if you guys click on that, you guys should be able to see that window pop up, and you can actually authenticate your API key with that window. Yeah, so this is, you should go into the authorization tab. So that's why I came back. Yeah, right there. It's hard to see that you I think it's the black version. Oh yeah, we cut out. Also, that's the, I think we minimized it. Yeah. That makes sense. So it seems like everyone's keeping up pretty well, so I'm going to move to the next slide here. So we set up our Postman sort of instance, so to speak. So now we're going to actually like mess with these requests. So if you guys type in the following link. And remember, we actually, if those open braces don't look familiar to you, basically they let you use variables inside of your link. And so if you guys just input that and click on send, you should be able to execute that GET request. And please make sure to type it out like that exactly. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Yeah.
How about environments? Like, should we set our environments to like stated?
Oh yeah. You should set your environment. So as you guys can see on the top right, it says deploy. So I've named my environment deploy. And so you guys should definitely set that to the environment you guys made previously before you guys click on send. Yeah, good catch.
Yeah.
If you have questions, like, please raise your hand. We'll get to it. Oh. Wait, does anyone know?
So did you create an environment?
So one quick note, you guys have to type in that link exactly like it says, no end slashes, and also inside of your URL, you guys should add a slash in there if you guys didn't already. So Postman is nice, but you still have to be really specific, just like everything when you do while programming. So just make sure you guys just follow that exact link in the slides, and you guys should be good. Does anyone have any issues that they want to clear up? Because we're starting to get to the fun part of the workshop where you guys get to mess with requests and start playing our game later. So I want to make sure that everyone's on track. So, oh yeah. Yeah. I can check which copy is fine.
Yeah, you should. Just yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move on here. Real quick, I'll just go over documentation. I'm going to go through this part briefly because we're running out of time. Basically, if you guys have seen documentation online in general programming, it's really complicated, but Postman does a lot of the dirty work for you. They make really easy to understand APIs. So let's explore one of the documentations that our developers made for this event. So if you guys go to this link, and you click on View Documentation, you can actually see all of the requests that you guys have made so far today, and see how they work, what are the parameter types, and how to actually execute them. Okay, so let's move on here. So please, if you guys want to participate in the game, you guys should definitely do this. You can click on the Run in Postman button inside of the documentation, and you guys can actually see the entire collection. And that's really important because it has all of the setup you need to actually execute, get, put, and post and delete requests so you guys can win the game. For the sake of time, I'm going to have to move on. Again, you should open your collection and make sure you click on that icon. And all this stuff we've talked about before. Basically, this is where you should actually set your environment up, because now that you have a new collection, you need to make sure that you set up your environment accordingly.
So you can check it to see if the scores are see what I'm saying? Those things that it hasn't already.
So if you guys set up your collection correctly, you can actually see the
That's what makes it.
requests on the left-hand side, and you guys can actually see all the. You guys can see that you can get all boxes, change color, delete color, edit color, and it's all conveniently laid out there for you. So if you click on the clip, get all boxes requests as instructed here, and you click send, this is the kind of output you should see. You should see all of the colors there. And it's really nice for you to see all the colors in one place, essentially. And then, so this is post request basically. What you can do is select the post request, and it should look like that. You can click send, and the post request should be fine. For the sake of time, I'm just gonna move quickly through this. This is just like before when you guys changed the colors. Remember the curl URLs that you guys use? You can just change the color, and your link should look something like that. You can also change the int box ID. Remember that we did this manually with the curl as well. And when you do that, you can just click the send button and you can make a lot of posts. And we're not going to go over put and delete. It's very, very similar. So now let's move on to our game. So there's 4 colors, right? And this is the URL. No capitals though, but that's the URL. Okay. So let's give you guys a chance to split up into 4 teams. So how are we going to do this?
That sounds like such an advantage.
No one's.
We're not ready, bro. Red versus use the collection on it.
I just run it with a script.
That'd be so mean. What about the we let edit?
Wait, it's almost empty.
Okay, so quick show of hands. How many of you guys are ready for the game? Yeah, so we had to rush through the last part, unfortunately. But basically, whoever can play the game, you guys can play the game. If not, we're gonna try to get you guys like all caught up. So you guys can, even though you guys may not have a chance to win, you guys can still know how to use Postman and whatnot.
We started to get
So how many of you guys need the collection to import? Does anyone need it? Okay, I thought people needed it, but I guess not. So if you guys want to get set up, basically you can go to this URL and actually open up the Postman documentation, and you can see all the requests there.
You're just messing right now. I'm with the game server. Was it a server?
Okay, so unfortunately we're gonna have to wrap up. We didn't have time to play out the whole game, but if you guys would like some stickers from Postman, you guys can come to the front and pick up your stickers. Otherwise, we hope you guys gained a lot from this workshop, and have good luck in HackDavis and have a good rest of your day.